Okay, the next item of business is a statement by Kate Forbes on Alexander Dennis Limited. The Deputy First Minister will take questions at the end of her statement. Therefore, there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on Kate Forbes, Deputy First Minister, up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am absolutely delighted to be back in the Chamber to update members on the landmark announcement that Alexander Dennis delivered to its workforce in Larbert on Monday. The First Minister was delighted to join Alexander Dennis's workforce and trade union representatives as they received the welcome news that the threat of redundancy had been lifted and the company has decided to continue bus manufacturing in Scotland. The First Minister was also pleased to announce £4 million of Scottish Government funding towards a furlough scheme for Alexander Dennis's manufacturing staff. That's the first time that any Scottish Government has supported a company-administered furlough scheme. It's an innovative and exceptional intervention to support hundreds of jobs within Alexander Dennis and will act as a bridge to a sustainable future for the company in Scotland as orders pick up again. This outcome has been hard-won, requiring the trust, dedication and goodwill of a range of partners, including the management of Alexander Dennis, the workers, trade unions and our enterprise agencies. Together, through close collaboration, we have come a long way in a very short period of time. When I made my last statement to the Chamber on Alexander Dennis in June, the future was unquestionably uncertain. And I know that this was having a real impact on the workforce in Larbert and Falkirk and the wider community. At that point, the company had just made public a new strategy for its UK manufacturing operations designed to consolidate all bus manufacturing into a single site at Scarborough in Yorkshire. If enacted, production at Falkirk would have been discontinued and the site closed, whilst production at Larbert would have been suspended on the completion of current contracts. Around the same time, the company commenced a statutory workforce consultation that placed up to 400 roles at risk of redundancy. Without a substantive and agile response, Scotland would have been facing the prospect of losing our bus manufacturing capacity for good. That would have ended over a century of automotive excellence in central Scotland and dealt a hammer blow to the affected workers, their families and the surrounding communities. But the economic consequences would not have stopped there, as members reminded me during that statement. Alexander Dennis estimates that for every direct job in bus manufacturing, there is a multiplier of 3 to 4 jobs in the wider supply chain and support services. The commitment of this government was to leave no stone unturned to find practical solutions. We said we wouldn't posture or play politics with the situation and would explore every avenue to avoid redundancies, and we have done just that. Since June, ministers across this government have engaged extensively with Alexander Dennis and their Canadian parent company, NFI Group, to understand the core issues and explore all possible avenues of support. We heard about the challenges posed by increasing international competition and the need for a clear UK bus demand pipeline. We gained an appreciation of the huge scale of future demand for zero-emission buses from public transport operators across the UK as they increasingly make the switch from diesel-powered to electric vehicles. Last year, in 2024, only 7.4% of all buses in England were zero emissions. In Scotland, the adoption of zero-emission buses has been much faster, but still a great many of the buses on our roads today will have to be replaced over the next decade to meet our climate goals. A just transition to net zero requires that we retain the industrial capacity and the skills needed to fulfil that demand and to build those zero-emission buses right here in Scotland. Despite the present temporary lull in activity, Alexander Dennis is increasingly confident about their order book, but they needed a bridge to the future. And the Scottish Government has offered that with the furlough support we have made available. The furlough scheme, which will operate for up to 26 weeks, is intended to be the bridge needed to a sustainable future for Alexander Dennis. If all the conditions of the furlough grant are met, including initial evidence of contracted orders, then Alexander Dennis will be entitled to recover from the Scottish Government up to 80% of the basic wage costs of its manufacturing staff in Scotland. The terms of our scheme have parallels with the UK Government's Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, with a maximum claim of £2,500 per employee per month, equivalent to a gross annual salary of £30,000. The company will be responsible for the payment of wages above the £2,500 per month threshold and for all employers' national insurance and pension contributions. Importantly, the Government support scheme extends only to those employees of Alexander Dennis whose roles are linked directly to bus manufacturing. The furlough support scheme is also time-limited to a maximum period of 26 weeks, and the total costs will not exceed £4.1 million. If Alexander Dennis chooses to take employees off furlough for periods of training to conduct work or during pre-arranged factory shutdowns, such as the festive holidays, all costs for these periods will be borne by the company. So our furlough grant is a time-limited and proportionate intervention that protects the industrial talent base that we have, whilst limiting the burden on taxpayers. Furlough, of course, is not a standalone intervention. During that period of furlough, training and other productivity-enhancing assistance will continue to be offered by Scottish Enterprise. Scottish Enterprise has a strong 10-year-plus strategic partnership with the business, and their R&D and operational support will help the company to meet market challenges through investment and support the sites to exit furlough with improved performance. I have addressed the contributions of Alexander Dennis, the Government and Scottish Enterprise. I now want to acknowledge the workforce and the vital role that their representatives in the trade unions, Unite and GMB, have played in the announcements that we and the company have been able to make this week. For the past few months, these have been extremely worrying times for all who work proudly for Alexander Dennis, for their families and for the local communities of Larbert and Falkirk. In spite of those challenges, the workforce has demonstrated enormous resilience and collaborated with the company on an agreement that modernises operational working practices. That the shop floor has approved these changes through an overwhelmingly positive ballot last week is a testament to their commitment to the future of Alexander Dennis. I've engaged with both Unite and GMB representatives regularly over the past few months. I think they may be sick of the sight of my face. I did so again yesterday. And throughout it all, I have been so impressed by their determination to support their members, their desire to find solutions and their openness to change. In conclusion, I hope that the announcements made this week will bring comfort to the workers at Alexander Dennis, and they can look forward with confidence yet again. It's essential that we protect the skilled manufacturing capacity we need to build our transition to a green industrial economy. With our innovative furlough support, this Government has again demonstrated a willingness to step in to support Scottish workers and to get behind Scottish manufacturing. There's a lot more to do, Presiding Officer. With the Parliament's permission, I imagine this may not be my last comment in the Chamber on this matter. There are still some challenges ahead, and I have been assured that Alexander Dennis is working hard to secure orders in national and international markets, and their confidence in the order book is increasing. As a result of a great collaboration between the company, the workforce and the Government, a bridge to a sustainable future for Alexander Dennis is now in place. Thank you.
Thank you. The Deputy First Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes, after which we will then have to move on to the next item of business. I'd be grateful for members wishing to ask a question who haven't already done so to press the request to speak buttons. And I call first Stephen Kerr.
First of all, let me thank the Deputy First Minister for advance sight of her statement, and I welcome the Scottish Government's £4 million support package, which will provide some short-term relief for the workforce at Alexander Dennis in Larbert and Falkirk. And that is a positive step, but it does not address the fundamental issue. This is not simply about bridging a few months, it's about the long-term sustainable future of bus manufacturing in Scotland. And Alexander Dennis have been crystal clear with all of us And with the UK and Scottish governments, it doesn't seek favours, but it only seeks the chance to compete fairly. At present, procurement rules tilt the field against domestic producers, while heavily subsidised imports, particularly from China, undercut Scottish manufacturers and win contracts that should sustain our own industry and jobs. That cannot continue. If we are serious about jobs, skills and industrial resilience, procurement reform must now be a priority. So, will the Deputy First Minister commit today to working with the UK Government and pressing the UK Government for a joint approach to reform that ensures this problem does not persist in the future, because the future viability of companies like Alexander Dennis depends on it? And will she publish clear proposals with timelines and firm commitments to deliver the level playing field our manufacturers need to compete and win the orders that will secure their future?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I thank the member both for the tone and the substance of his question. Let me say a few remarks, because he is absolutely right that the furlough is merely a means to an end, the end being the orders and the order book. Now, we've set out that the furlough scheme can only be drawn down when there is evidence of Alexander Dennis receiving orders, and I will not be able to go into any detail here on an order book, because it is so commercially sensitive, and that may refer to why I said I would be happy to come back and talk further. But they are increasingly confident about the short-term opportunities for orders. But he's right in saying that what we need going beyond that is a long-term pipeline of orders. And the two answers to that are, first of all, that we anticipate, through the UK Government in particular, evidence of either mayoral authorities, local government and the UK Government itself procuring more buses over the medium to long term. Now, that was always going to be too long for Alexander Dennis to wait, which is why the Scottish Government has stepped in to provide support in the short term. But he also asked about the regulatory changes, because in the first press release that Alexander issued, they specifically referenced that unfair position as they perceived it. So the short answer is yes, because we haven't seen any progress yet on those regulatory changes that Alexander Dennis want to see. And we are continuing to engage with the UK Government on those points. It's partly to do with subsidy control legislation. There's a lot of technical details behind it, and I'd be more than happy to pick up with the member or any other members on the detail that needs to be changed. But it is within the gift of the UK Government to make those regulatory changes.
Daniel Johnson.
Thank the Deputy First Minister for advance sight of her statement. These have been incredibly difficult times for the workforce in Alexander Dennis, so this is undoubtedly a welcome intervention that provides breathing space for the firm to repair its order book. But that surely is what needs to be the focus now, which is why Scottish Labour have been working to reach out to colleagues, especially mayors, to see what can be done to win orders. So can I ask, firstly, the Deputy First Minister, what efforts is the Scottish Government making to secure orders, and what is her expectation? But this also undoubtedly raises questions about industrial strategy. These efforts are welcome, but surely that should be put in up front. So despite £30 million worth of funding over 10 years from Scottish Enterprise and £40 million from the last round of ScotZeb funding, only 44 bus orders were obtained by Alexander Dennis. Now, if ScotZeb 2 is being reopened, what lessons have been learned and what will be put right so that we actually win orders for Alexander Dennis through future funding rounds from the Scottish Government?
Deputy First Minister.
So let me just say up front, and this will be a common refrain this afternoon, I am not going to go into detail about orders because of the commercial sensitivity. So I'll just say that up front in response to every answer. So he asked about efforts to secure orders, and I will not go into detail on that. But he also asks about about what engagement we've had with the UK Government. Now, there was obviously a lot of noise when this announcement was first made back in June, and promises made by the UK Government to work on a pipeline. We await details of that pipeline. I think we've been assured that it will be forthcoming in autumn. We were always aware that that's medium to long term. So it is definitely important, but it would be too late for Alexander Dennis in that regard. So I'm more than happy to continue to engage with the member on the question of orders, but in the short term, it's a bridge that's required, and that's what we've secured.
Thank you. There's a lot of members wishing to ask questions, so the usual plea for brevity in those questions and, as far as possible, with the responses. I call first Michael Matheson, to be followed by Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I offer my thanks to the Deputy First Minister for a very considerable level of engagement in this issue over the course of the summer with the trade union and with the company and with myself directly. On Monday, the company were very clear that in order to create a sustainable pathway for the company, the issue of procurement reform is necessary. And when I met with the trade unions, both Unite and the GMB at the factory on Monday, they were very clear on the need for the Subsidy Control Act to be reformed in order to create a pathway for that procurement reform. It was introduced by the last Conservative government, and it's now in the hands of the Labour government in Westminster. What commitment have the UK Government given to the Scottish Government that they will address the issues of concern within the Subsidy Control Act to ensure that we don't find ourselves in this situation again with Alexander Dennis?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, I thank Michael Matheson immensely for his staunch representation of his local constituents in this regard and for the constructive way he has engaged. He asks about the route to reform, and I remain of the view that we do need to see regulatory reform alongside medium to long-term pipeline of bus orders. In terms of the Subsidy Control Act, we continue to engage with the UK Government on subsidy control legislation. Section 17 of the Subsidy Control Act prohibits subsidies being given which are contingent on using domestic over imported goods or services. That's often referred to as local content subsidies. That prohibition is founded in long-standing WTO law and also implements our commitments in the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement. So he'll understand, therefore, that there are limits within which the Scottish Government needs to operate, and we do need to see the UK Government making any changes that are required. The same would go for procurement law as well.
Thank you. We've got 11 members wanting in and just under 12 minutes. I call Murdo Fraser, to be followed by Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Given Alexander Dennis was investing in Scarborough to consolidate manufacturing on that site in order to improve efficiency, what can the Scottish Government do to improve the long-term viability of the Scottish sites? Because while the prospect of new contracts is extremely welcome, it's not a full solution if the parent company NFI believe those contracts could be more efficiently and effectively delivered in Scarborough.
First Minister.
Well, in terms of the long-term viability of those sites, Scottish Enterprise are actively working with the company, and that will be part of the overall package of support to ensure that there is investment in the Scottish site so that it can deliver on any orders that are forthcoming.
Willie Coffey, to be followed by Richard Leonard.
Officer, we met the senior management team from Alexander Dennis at our Economy Committee not so long ago, and I was hugely impressed with their commitment to find a solution to save the business and save the jobs in Scotland. Does the Deputy First Minister share that view, and is she confident that going forward, Alexander Dennis is in safe hands with good management and fantastic staff?
Deputy First Minister.
I've been hugely inspired by both the management and their level of commitment and also the workforce representation. Having worked on a number of cases where there are redundancies being threatened or the prospect of closure, so much of it hangs on whether or not a company and its management and unions are willing to cooperate collaboratively. And in this case, it's been very impressive to see them do that.
Richard Leonard, to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
Can I remind members of my register of interest? Can I ask the Deputy First Minister if the Government will give environmental performance, social value and Scottish economic impact much greater weighting in the evaluation criteria in future rounds of its Scottish Zero Emissions Bus Challenge Fund?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, as the member will know, particularly from my earlier quite long answer, we operate within the legislation, the regulation that we are required to operate within, and if there are to be any changes which the company themselves have said they want to see, that would have to be through the UK Government. When all of this news broke, I was receiving so much advice about what changes we could make. I think one of the recommendations from Labour was, for example, to use the Crown Commercial Services contract, because that had worked in Manchester. But actually that still wouldn't allow you to identify a particular company or a particular location. You have to operate within the law. So if the member wants to see the law changed, then he would have an ally here on delivering those reforms.
Kevin Stewart, to be followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The well-being of Scottish manufacturing and Scotland's industrial economy is a key priority, which is why the SNP Scottish Government has fought tirelessly against the closure of Grangemouth oil refinery and worked to secure the jobs at Alexander Dennis. Can the Cabinet Secretary speak to existing UK Government policies and the negative impact that they have on local job retention in Falkirk and Larbert and in job creation across Scotland?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, we want a strong manufacturing sector to drive Scotland's economic growth, and we want to maximise the opportunity for Scotland's industrial sectors. I talked earlier about the number of buses that may be in the pipeline as we make the just transition, particularly from diesel to net zero. So it's about protecting the talent right now. At the end of the day, there's a lot more work UK-wide than there is purely in Scotland, for the sole reason that we've already made a lot of the interventions and investment already. So it is about ensuring that there's a fair share of work right across the UK.
Mark Ruskell, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
It's really welcome that jobs have been saved through the introduction of the furlough scheme for 26 weeks. But what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give that Scottish Enterprise, who have worked with Alexander Dennis for the last 10 years, will ensure this company has a viable future in Scotland after 26 weeks? What will Scottish Enterprise do differently compared to their work over the last 10 years? What will they do more of to ensure there's a viable future?
Deputy First
Well,
Minister.
I don't think the company have at any point complained about the support that they've already received from Scottish Enterprise, because that support has helped to make improvements and drive productivity growth. The challenge that the company referenced was around securing an order book, and of course they can only draw down the furlough scheme if there is evidence of an order book. I do believe that we need to keep working quite intensely to ensure that we don't end up back here in a few years' time for the reasons that others have set out. Ultimately, there needs to be a secure long-term order book for the company to give its workforce the confidence that it needs.
Willie Rennie, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Well, of course, this is good news. But does the Deputy First Minister agree with Michael Matheson that it is essential to have reform of the Subsidy Control Act to secure the long-term future of Alexander Dennis?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, he's heard in my answer, I think, to Willie Rennie, that is, sorry, an answer to Michael Matheson, that was one of the company's asks in terms of reform. I've set out in some technical detail, I think, where we stand in relation to that. The other one, of course, is around procurement law as well, because although it's a devolved matter, it's still subject to UK-wide and international obligations, which are reserved, and to amend procurement law in order to enable preferential treatment, for example, for domestic manufacturers requires the UK to make changes to its international trade obligations. So Scotland cannot legislate in isolation for that in favour of domestic bidders at the expense of bidders from other countries with which a relevant international trade agreement applies. So I think we need to be conscious of that and make representation to the UK Government if we think that changes need to be made.
Jackie DeBar to be followed by Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the announcement that 400 jobs have been secured as a result of the Scottish Government's intervention and furlough support. Can the Deputy First Minister say any more about this funding and how it will be deployed to secure the future of the Alexander Dennis workforce?
Deputy First Minister.
Well, obviously some of the details of the furlough support are commercially sensitive, but the intention is that this funding will be available to Alexander Dennis once a certain threshold of new orders has been evidenced. And once met, the furlough grant entitles Alexander Dennis to recover 80% of the basic wage costs of its manufacturing staff. And that gives them the much-needed flexibility they need to place employees on furlough during the period when materials for new orders are being sourced, but also crucially ensures the facility will be operationally ready to commence work at the end of the 26-week period.
Megan Gallagher to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Deputy First Minister mentioned in her statement that the furlough support scheme is time limited to a maximum period of 26 weeks. My question is, what happens at 27 weeks should this strategy not work? Because there needs to be, and members have mentioned it here this afternoon, decisive procurement reform. So does the Deputy First Minister accept that if procurement reform does not give domestic manufacturers a fair chance to win contracts, this will result in the offshoring of vital jobs and skills? So my question is, what contingency plans are the Scottish Government currently considering should this strategy not work to make sure that we're not going to lose vital skills and jobs?
Well, I'm determined that it will work. And on the substance of Megan Gallagher's question, there's some really important elements to this. The first is that the furlough funding will only be made available once there is evidence of new orders. So, as I said to Jackie Dunbar, that gives them the time to source materials. Essentially, that's the timescale that the company have identified as being required for preparing for the actual work to arrive. Secondly, that order book, obviously, it needs to constantly be updated and refreshed. In other words, we don't want to end up in the same place again, which is why there needs to be intensive work to ensure that there is a longer pipeline of work in the medium to long term. And then thirdly, in terms of the procurement changes and the Subsidy Control Act, I've obviously gone through the technical details, but there's certainly an appetite from our side of the Chamber to work very collaboratively to see if there are changes that can be delivered through the UK Government.
Paul Sweeney to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd also like to commend the work of my colleagues Ian Murray, Secretary of State, and Ewan Steinbank, MP for Falkirk, on their efforts to save bus manufacturing in Scotland, particularly on extending the new UK Procurement Act provisions on social value to Scotland. But ultimately, Scottish bus manufacturing must have the most advanced vehicle production facility in the world to be competitive, and the Government can offer direct subsidy to manufacturers like Alexander Dennis to achieve that, notwithstanding the Subsidy Control Act. So will the Government look to cooperate with the UK Government on benchmarking the site at Camelin, which is antiquated, and making sure it is upgraded and that bus manufacturing facilities in Scotland are competitive?
Well, in short, we will work with anybody to deliver improvements and changes. I have to say that there was a lot of very helpful interventions at the very beginning of this process, and I too commend Ian Murray for taking a number of my calls last minute to try and make progress. And sadly, though, over the last few months, there has not been the progress that we would have liked to see. We've been promised information about a pipeline, hopefully in autumn. Obviously, we're hopefully into autumn fairly soon. We haven't seen the pipeline yet of orders, by which point it would have been too late because the consultation period ended on Monday, having already been extended a few times. So the furlough scheme is entirely Scottish Government. UK Government hasn't provided funding, but where we really need to see their help is through the longer-term pipeline.
Very briefly, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. The furlough scheme is very welcome, but it's contingent on the company providing evidence of orders. So when does the Deputy First Minister need to see that evidence, and how many orders are needed to meet the requirements of the scheme?
Briefly as possible.
Well, that will be brief, because I'm afraid any questions about orders are commercially sensitive, and I look forward to the point at which members can quiz me on any orders that are forthcoming, but at this point in time I'm afraid I'm unable to answer any questions on orders.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. That concludes this item of business. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.